Hey, I'm your host, Bree Wilde, and this is Marquee Memories. Here we sit down with your favorite artists to talk about their top concert memories as fans. Today's guest is an all-pop singer-songwriter celebrating her newest release, Happiness is Going to Get You. Her 2026 calendar is already really packed, so we're grateful she took a little time to come and talk to us today. Allie X, welcome.
Thank you for that intro.
Yeah. So a lot of the commentary on this new album is how close it was to releasing your past album. Like your other album is still so fresh. Were the songs written together and just sort of separated into different projects?
Some of them were, yeah. Yeah, Girl with No Face is the record that came before this one, and that was released in February of 2024. And that was my first sort of fully self-produced body of work endeavor. And the people that follow my project, my fans, aka my fans, know that was a bit of a tortured process. It took 4 years, started during the pandemic, huge technical sort of learning curve and challenge for me, very sort of rageful and angry lyrical content, got really ill during the process. Like it was a tumultuous sort of time. But whilst I was programming that record, because it was really a lot of outboard equipment and synthesizers and drum machines and stuff, every so often I would get these melodies or chord progressions that would sort of come into my head, and I would sit down at the upright in my studio and just get my iPhone voice memo going and kind of tinker around and record these very sort of different piano ideas, and they were so clearly not the energy of Girl with No Face that I would sort of just file them away for later pursual, and that's essentially some of those are what became the songs on this new record.
I like that your album has a little nickname, Higgy.
Higgy.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad was like, when I told him the title, he was like, that's a good acronym, Higgy.
Right. I'm sure you didn't think of it in advance, but
yeah, no, my dad actually pointed it out. It was like, yeah.
So did this album come together a little bit faster, and was it a little bit more less tumultuous, I guess?
Yeah, it was a completely different experience. I just, after I toured Girl with No Face, I got creatively restless, as I tend to do. I think like a month after tour, I was like, oh, I'll just pursue some of these voice memos I recorded and see if I can flesh them out into full songs, basically. And what I intended to just turn into a piano arrangement, I ended up producing out. And I was having so much fun that I kind of accidentally produced a new album.
That's a happy accident.
Yeah.
But are you still touring a little bit on Girl with No Face? I saw some tour dates you have, maybe overseas. So you're still sort of touring on that too.
Yes. So you probably saw the Girl with No Face tour in Sao Paulo, which we're doing 2 nights in Sao Paulo. And I've been told that the Brazilians really love that record, and the promoter specifically requested a Girl with No Face show, of which I already have. So I was like, sure.
Yeah.
But I've also been thinking with the other tours I have next year, some of which are announced and some are unannounced at the moment. I think that even though the 2 records are so different, I do see a synergy between them as these sort of strange sisters. And I think there's like an authenticity in my voice that I found during the last 5 years that rings true through both of them. And so I'm like right now figuring out sort of the creative and the set list for next year's tours and how I'll sort of marry the 2 works.
So they won't be separated out. You think there's a way to make them work together?
I think so.
Nice.
I am a person who really like jumps around sonically and genre-wise and stuff, but I'm never too intimidated by the idea of trends or cohesiveness or anything, because I feel like my perspective and my voice is the cohesiveness.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. Maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot. I'm not sure. It's just how I like to do things.
Well, it's a new sort of challenge to come up with something that serves both albums, right? In the live setting?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's almost it's about tempo maybe, and about instrumentation, and like the idea of messing with those 2 things is kind of fun to me. And like how organic instrumentation might work in a machine programmed album and vice versa is kind of also interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like come see the tour and see where I land. I'm not sure, but I've been sort of fascinated by that juncture. Like for the last week or two, I've been thinking about it.
So you sort of have a DIY ethic where you want to do as much as you can by yourself. How does that work out when you're on tour?
Tour is actually the place where I would say my business is like the least DIY. It's a lot easier for everyone to just have their role and for me to just be an artist on tour, actually. Yeah, why? I think because there's not commissions and contracts involved, probably. It's just a lot sort of simpler. And there's like no need for like the story and the hype and all those things that really pollute the music industry. So, yeah, things are more straightforward on the road. And actually really, even though it's physically grueling, my mind kind of goes to this more peaceful place on the road because everything's just so well-defined and straightforward.
Do you still feel creative while you're on the road, or is that sort of a different mindset?
I think it's really, you've probably heard artists say this before. It's really kind of about like physical survival on the road. Like, where's my next meal coming from?
Meeting the basic needs.
Yeah. How am I going to get enough hours of sleep if we get to the hotel at 1 a.m. and have a lobby call at 8 a.m. or whatever, it's like that kind of stuff. But when I'm on stage, I do feel like the connection to the fans and the sort of, like the personification of like the characters in the songs and stuff. That's certainly like a creative sort of pursuit. I don't really write when I'm on the road. Like that part of me goes to sleep for a while. I'm not
hibernation.
Yeah.
Shall we get into some of these memories?
Sure. Yeah.
Should we start with the most recent? Ethel Cain,
Hammersmith Apollo, London, 2025.
So set the scene.
Okay, the scene. So I think I just arrived in London from Paris, and my friend Cal was like, "Hey, I've got an extra ticket for Ethel Cain tomorrow night. You want to go?" I was like, "Sure." I'm a fan, and I know the bass player in her band as well, Kaylee Steinberg, and so and I was a big fan of Perverts. I thought that EP was like very bold and kind of punk in a way, and very enjoyable for me to listen to. So anyway, so it was like an instant yes. And I think I arrived during the opener set, and I think I told Kaylee we were coming, and so we kind of got this like upgraded seating experience. We were like at the front row of the mezzanine area, and we sat down. I took off my leather jacket and awaited the show. How is that for setting the scene?
There you go. And how was it? Why did it become one of your pinnacle memories?
I was really amazed at a bunch of things. Musically, it really, I mean, if you look around at that show, you're looking at a lot of young pop fans. Same sort of demographic as me, though I don't have as many fans. But what we experienced musically was not a pop show. It was she's into like drone music and noise, as far as I can tell. And I think I've read that as well. And it really sort of, that influence overarched the whole set. And as a listener, like if I'm listening to like pop music, I because I'm a writer, I'm kind of going into like this hyper analysis that it makes it hard actually for me to listen to pop music and go to a pop show. But this wasn't that. It was very sort of, I was just feeling like vibrations and like I was just rocking the whole time and having this sort of emotional release through music that I just hadn't experienced at a pop show in a long time. And I just thought it was so cool how, because of this sort of broadness of what she's done musically, like her audience had to embrace that as well. And I just thought that was really cool. And I remember like the sound was crazy good as well. I was speaking to Kaylee about it afterwards. I was like, who did this sound? Your drums sounded like sampled. Like it was just really sonically so strong, like one of the strongest things I've seen.
What, if you could, would you take from that experience to pull into your shows? Like what inspiration?
Well, actually, it's funny. We were just talking about like how I'm planning on trying to meld those two albums into one. I think I just took from it a sense that like you can take the live work quite far away from the recorded work in a live show, and you should maybe spend the time to do that and make that sort of transformation. You don't have to, but I just felt really inspired to explore different sonic textures, different changes in tempo. I also thought, this isn't a sound thing, but the way that she performed and the way it was lit was really clever as well. She was just on a podium the whole time, and the lighting was such that you couldn't see her face. You could just see her silhouette. And it really was all about letting the music do the talking. And the lights were programmed in a really cool way as well. It was very hypnotic, but it wasn't about being at the front of the stage and working the crowd as such. So I thought that was super cool as well.
The way she connected was sort of different than the typical, like, looking into their eyes and singing back to them sort of situation.
Yeah, I think if you're closer, maybe you would be seeing her eyes. But yeah, she was kind of just a foggy silhouette for most of the show on a podium, not moving around. And it was still so powerful.
So she really took all of the elements of the show into consideration, like the sound and the lights and the everything. So
yeah.
Do you feel like you're going to do that for your next tour?
I don't think I think I'm too theatrical to do something like that. Like I really like getting sort of in people's faces and being aggressive and strutting around and whatever. But I still love the principle of it.
Yeah, I was listening to your Zach Sang interview, and you were saying like, oh, I don't write on piano because I'm too, or something too effective. I don't write on piano because I'm too dramatic.
And then I went and did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what changed between then and now. Did you embrace the drama?
I think what I was saying there, and I actually said that in the same thing in my bio for this album, is that like I was a classical and theater kid who really didn't have good taste or frame of reference for listening to music until my 20s, which is an embarrassing fact, but it is true, and it explains why it's taken me so long to become good at songwriting. So when I started writing, I was like girl at a piano vibes, and like I was really comfortable at the piano because I had trained at the piano or whatever. But because I had sort of no cool frame of knowledge musically, those early songs that I wrote at the piano were they just sounded like musical theater. They sounded like bad Jason Robert Brown or something. Or like a Disney song maybe. And so for me to find my sound, I had to learn Ableton Live and start programming and have this whole sort of backdoor entrance into songwriting that got me away from that really sort of saccharine thing that I had. And I had to listen to so much more music, and I'm still listening to so much music because ultimately, if you want to be a good writer, I think you need to listen to so much. You need to be a fan of music, you know?
There's a period of absorption before creation.
There has to be, I think. Maybe there's exceptions to that. But so now I think what's happened, what I hope has happened is I've actually done this sort of like full circle where I've listened to so much and had this sort of increase in taste and knowledge that I think I can now sit at a piano and write a half decent song. And that's what this album is. Hopefully they're half decent. I never really know. But I listen to them and enjoy them. I think they're decent compositions now. Whereas I listened to the work when I started out, and I'm like like she tried
somewhere.
Yeah, you well, that's another thing actually. You really have to just go for it. Like you have to write the bad songs to get to the good ones. I'm always telling that to people asking about pursuing this.
Just do it. Just create.
Just make a bunch of shit, because like that's the only way you're gonna get to And you have to be a bit like delusional about it too.
Just like I have a inflated sense of confidence. Like, yes, absolutely, I could fly. I could do that.
Yeah. I think so.
I feel like there are songs on your album, and maybe if I was like a bigger music nerd, I would recognize them. But like, it triggers like a sort of nostalgia or like a reference that I can't totally pinpoint, but it makes me think of, Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I am quite referential in my catalog. Like I usually do have a bunch of songs in mind, and I make some amalgamation of all those influences. My last record was very like that. This record has a little bit of that, but I would say what you're hearing is probably less intentional on this record than prior works. It was the first time that I was writing without a frame of reference. Not the first time ever, but I would say in a overarching full body of work sense, this was the first time that I really just was sort of grabbing things out of the air and not thinking too much about, oh, this could be like this song, or this could, or a melody like that song could be cool, or whatever.
So you were already a fan of Ethel Cain before you saw the show, right?
Yeah.
What did you walk away from after the show?
Some of it I've touched on already. Just this reminder that rebelliousness is so important, and just doing what you want as an artist is really important. And if the music is strong enough, it can stand alone. Yeah, those are sort of the main ones. I just felt like I felt like I was watching like a modern day rebel, and that to me is really inspiring, especially considering how much pressure and how difficult an industry this can be, especially towards females and stuff.
So you were in London. Were you on tour at the time?
No, I was kind of basing myself out there, as most of my team is based in London or in Europe. And I had, I think 7 different events in the UK around that time that I had to do. So it just made the most sense. I'm also just loving London these days and probably relocating there.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the second one.
Nick Cave at the Forum, Los Angeles, 2018. This was a concert that I think my publicist got myself and my partner tickets comped for this. And so it was kind of like a last minute thing. I think I found out that she was going. I was like, "You're going to Nick Cave?" She's like, "Yeah." And I think that's what happened.
But it wasn't like a big show you were planning to go to or anything like that.
No, honestly, I don't normally plan. I'm not like a proper concert goer, I'm ashamed to say. But yeah, it was amazing. I definitely go into those big venue, like big arena stadium type stuff, with a sort of feeling that I might not like it that much, because it's hard to feel the music for me when it's that big of a room. Yeah. But leave it to Nick Cave and to Warren to be able to fill a space like that with like so much soul and emotion. And it was very transcendent experience.
What moment stood out to you in the show? Like how did Nick Cave make it not feel so cavernous and
Yeah, I mean, it really, again, was the music led the way. It felt intimate, even though it was huge. I think those of us that are fans of Nick Cave, one of the reasons is there's a certain like rawness to the music, even though it was the Forum. It that still sort of pervaded. And I remember Warren doing all sorts of crazy stuff with various instruments, like deconstructing kind of these organic instruments and making these noises that were never intended to happen out of those instruments happen. And I think there was a point in the show where Nick had a bunch of audience members come on stage and was like holding hands. And yeah, there was a rawness and an intimacy to it that I'd never seen in a venue that size before.
What was your introduction to Nick Cave? How did you?
Like many of my favorite bands, my partner George was the one to introduce me. But honestly, the thing that had the biggest impact on me was the documentary, I think it's called Once More with Feeling, that sort of follows Nick's and Susie's life after the passing of their son. Mm. And I was so moved by that documentary. And it's soundtracked by the album that he was making at the time, which is, I think it's called Skeleton Tree or something.
Yeah, I think that's what this tour was, a Skeleton Tree tour.
Yeah, so that's really what kind of got me into the world. And the way the documentary's done is you're just sort of made very hyper aware of the lyrics, and his lyrics are what I think is his sort of strongest suit as an artist. And I just remember being sort of like heartbroken and amazed by that film, and having that context before the concert was probably what made me feel ultra connected.
And granted, you know, you're not playing the Kia Forum yet, but what would you take?
Not quite.
Not quite. What would you take away from that show? Like, what could you take from Nick Cave's performances?
I think what he does really well is tear down the barrier between himself as a public figure and his fans. Mm. And he maintains sort of an authenticity and an intimacy. And I think that's sort of like, that's a personal boundary that's different for everyone. Mm. But I think I'm probably like a little more guarded in that way. It's just whatever makes you feel safe, I guess. But yeah, there's I think no matter if you want fans on stage with you, like physically touching you or not, like I think that intimacy and that authenticity through the work, it has to remain if you want to sustain an artistic life for a long time. And he really has. That's another thing that inspires me is how long he's been around and the loyalty of his fans. I mean, he's not someone, maybe with Red Right Hand, that's sort of a hit, but like he's not really ever had like a hit record or been on like top 40 radio, but he's selling out multiple nights at the Forum, you know?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
What has been your favorite fan feedback about your newest album so far?
Someone said the other day, it feels like a mother's hug. Oh. I was like, that is a new energy for me. And I did feel that though, as I was writing it, like this sort of, I don't know if the energy is me, but there was this sort of a wiser, like comforting knowingness that was like flowing through me as I was writing it. And just to even channel that and be a vessel for that feels like a very new experience for me. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a great compliment. Shall we go to Robyn?
Robyn at the Phoenix in Toronto, 2008.
Yeah. Farther back,
yeah. So this would have been before like Allie X existed. I would have probably been developing the project. I was developing the project at the time, and probably around the time actually that I was starting to learn how to produce, or just before that, which is ultimately kind of how I found my sound and got the whole thing started. And Toronto, when I moved to Toronto, I mean, I'm from the outskirts of Toronto, but when I moved downtown, I met a whole bunch of new friends, all musicians. I'd been surrounded by theater people prior to that. And I moved to Toronto and I met all these students or recent grads of the University of Toronto jazz program. And they're just a bunch of like experimental, they didn't think of themselves as jazz musicians per se, but like they had really interesting taste. And the records that they were sending me to listen to and the shows that I was going to with like free music and like prepared piano and like, you know, all this kind of experimental stuff. It was this time in my life where I was really becoming enriched, I guess, by music for the first time. And there I was writing my cheesy like musical theater piano songs, but they even played with me, I remember. Like they were very encouraging. The other thing that I was exposed to at the time was a lot of indie rock music, like Tokyo Police Club, Born Ruffians, Broken Social Scene. Like there was this sort of indie rock thing that was going on really strongly in Toronto. And I remember just as I was trying to find my sound, like I was like, well, I'm not really that. Like, and I'm not really like, I'm not indie rock and I'm not as experimental as these shows that I'm going to. And so what am I? And I do remember at a certain point, this sort of awareness and this popularity in electronic music, it came onto my radar. And I finally sort of had this reference point of, oh, I think maybe what I'm writing could turn into that sound. And Robyn was one of those artists where I really related to the type of pop that she was making. And this concert that I saw was actually before, what was her huge album that broke her? Like, and I'm not talking about like Max Martin, Teenager Robyn, but like indie Robyn. It was Body Talk.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So this is pre-Body Talk. It was the album before that. I actually have no idea what it was called, but it was so good, and it was already that sound, and she'd already started her own like label, I think, and gone this independent route. And that was the album that she was touring. And it was a kind of a smaller show. It was like the Phoenix, which is like, you know, a venue that I could play now. Like that's probably at the size of venue that I would be playing. And yeah, her show was really cool. It had like, she had like a sampler and like a drumstick on stage. I remember she was like playing electronic toms, and like, it kind of just opened my mind, I guess, to what my own music could turn into. And at the time, this sounds weird, but I wasn't even thinking of that as pop music, and I wasn't thinking of myself as a pop artist, but it definitely sort of defined like a potential path for me, which gave me some much needed clarity.
Nice.
Yeah.
What, do you remember any specific moments from the show?
I don't remember a specific moment from the show. I remember just her general like cockiness as a stage persona, and her ability to move. And I remember her sweating, and she was sweating so much that her hair got like wet, and she would just slick it back. It was hot, and it was like, and the audience, that type of audience, it might have been the first time that I saw like a gay pop audience essentially as well. So like those things all stick in my mind.
Did you see Robyn anytime after this?
No, I don't think I have seen her after that.
Wow.
I would love to.
So I think you're the third Toronto person we've had.
Really?
Yeah.
Who are the others?
We had Lolo and the Beaches.
Oh yeah, the Beaches. Yeah. I think I've got friends in common with the Beaches.
Toronto seems like a music-y place.
It is a music-y place. There's a lot of cool music happening in Toronto. What I would say is like there's this sort of this humble, modest quality to Canadians that sort of pervades the arts, and it does make it a little more challenging to dream big if you're from Toronto. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I got my ass to Los Angeles that people started to pay any attention. But hopefully that changes. And also in a way, I hope it doesn't change, because I think that's kind of what makes Canada Canada as well. And it is that sort of humble and modest quality that maybe gets in the way of an artist seeing major success. It also just makes so that community is strong and people are nice, and so I don't know what to do about that. I do really appreciate the quality of life in Canada, even if I have a bit of heartburn about it, how I'm not able to really have a career in my home country.
Fair.
Yeah.
You said you're not a proper concert goer, but I'm curious, like, what was your first show? Was it a theater?
You know what it was? There was this children's show called Sharon, Lois and Bram in Canada in the 90s. And I think I went to Sharon, Lois and Bram live in concert.
Nice.
And actually, years later, I ended up at some like folk conference in Ottawa. This is while I was still living in Toronto. And they were there, and I think they did a song. And I realized, oh, Sharon, Lois and Bram are essentially like a folk trio who managed to like turn their thing into like a successful The show was actually called The Elephant Show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was so nice. I think I want to go back and watch it on YouTube now that I've said it, because I think it was like tastefully done, if I'm remembering, if my child memory serves me correctly.
Nice. What about any other concerts that sort of shaped your early concert going experiences?
I mean, I went to like a Whitney Houston concert. I was really obsessed with like Whitney, Mariah, and Celine when I was little. But I needed to be listening to like The Cure, you know, like that's what I've learned.
Didn't know.
That's what I've learned as an adult. Like I should have been listening to New Order and Depeche Mode and The Cure, but I still think it's like really cool how obsessed I was with like those incredible
The divas
from the. I don't think there's anyone like them now. Like that was like a special moment in time. Greatest voices of maybe the century. But yeah, I've always had that. I've had like a very sort of gothy, melancholic, extreme personality since I was a kid, and it would have served me well to have had a little more punk in my life, a little more post-punk, and something to like cry to, you know?
Right.
Like I didn't need all that technique that I got. What I needed was a bit more
something to relate to.
Yeah.
Well, music discovery was different then. So
it was so different. Yeah. Maybe I was born like a generation too early.
Maybe.
I find myself thinking that a lot, actually. Like, I really think there's a lot of digital like doomsday stuff going on now that's very scary. But I think one of the positive things is how sort of open and broad and diverse art is, and the access to art. And like in some ways, like we're creating like young robots because we're all on our devices so much, but they're like also really intelligent and like open-minded.
Open and intelligent-minded robots.
Yeah,
for sure. How does some of your fans say they discovered you?
Yeah, usually like the early fans would have found me like on Tumblr. I had these like looping GIFs of me spinning around that people would discover. I guess there's the Katy Perry tweet about the song that happened at the very beginning of my career. There's also just YouTube and videos and streaming, like, but I've never had like one of these spikes. You know, it's really been a slow, steady build of fans that
are really invested, though.
That's the nice thing about it. It's quite a devoted group. And yeah, some found me through visuals, mostly through music. Some of it from, I don't know, like Drag Race, or like I opened for a couple different fab, like female artists that were bigger than me, and you know, those fan bases like latched on. So that's a big one. And then I think just like, yeah, like the algorithmic radio stuff, like it really brings in quite a lot. I think, and my song Bitch, which is probably my biggest song, that was in a film called Closet Monster that my friend Steven made many years ago. And that seems to, even though it was like a very indie film, it had a time when it was on Netflix, and I get a lot like, oh, I heard Bitch in Closet Monster and I discovered you then. So that's another one that comes to mind.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Who do you think you could go on tour with and you could just like usurp their fans?
Usurp their fans?
Just, you know?
Usually the pop girlies.
The pop girlies?
Yeah. I'm going on tour with Magdalena Bay in February, and I'm interested to see how their fans like me, because they are pop fans, but they're also like, I'm guessing I have to meet them first, but I think Magdalena Bay really sits in a sort of like alt indie, almost rock kind of thing as well. So that'd be interesting.
So you said you're not a conscientious like showgoer, but who's still on your bucket list for you to see?
The Cure, actually. Yeah, I would love to see The Cure, Susie. New Order is not really playing as New Order anymore, but yeah, like those are my big, like, the
bands you wish you came to a little earlier.
Yeah, and I wish I'd seen back in the day. You know what I found out? My dad's from Coventry, England, and he wasn't a Pistols fan, but he like stumbled into a Sex Pistols show. And I'm like, that's crazy.
What?
Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
he saw one of the only, yeah. So like, I was watching the other day, John and Yoko documentary on HBO. Forget what it's called. It's about maybe John and Yoko in New York or something. It's about their years in New York. And seeing that one full televised concert that they did, it was some sort of a charitable thing. I forget, like a political thing. I forget for which cause exactly. But just watching John Lennon perform that concert is just like, yeah. Like I think I'd almost want to go like back in time.
Back in time to get that, yeah.
Yeah. Just like the power of that. It sort of floored me. He's just standing there singing, but he just had such a power. Yeah, I'm a Beatles fan too.
I don't know any people who are not Beatles fans, though. But if they do, they should not show themselves.
I love it. But yeah, I mean, you know who I should have mentioned actually? I did see Charli and Troy's tour.
Oh, yeah.
Which was the Sweat tour I saw in San Diego. I write with Troy and we're friends, so I was just in San Diego for something else, and I ended up there that night, and that actually really floored me as well. Charli is the only person on stage in her set, and that was another example of like an arena show that I was just like, damn, like you filled that room and it's just you on stage, and it was so powerful and cunty and just like, yeah.
I like how they set it up too, how they kind of like threw to each other back and forth. And
Yeah,
it was kind of like
yeah.
a co-headliner. So like, I don't know, it just felt like in perpetual motion like the whole time, yeah.
Yeah, that really floored me. And yeah, in an entirely different way than say like Ethel or Nick Cave. But yeah, I think like a concert can really be anything. It's just about finding that special thing that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you could also open for Florence,
Oh, that'd be cool.
right?
Yeah, I've never seen her live, but
I haven't yet, but I have tickets to next year's tour.
Oh, nice. Are you a concert goer then?
I am,
Okay,
yeah,
you
I
must
am.
be with this job.
I got this job because I didn't want anybody to tell me I couldn't go to concerts.
Nice.
So,
And now you get probably comped all the time.
not all the time, but a lot of times. We get 6 free tickets a year. So I've already banked.
Wait, Setlist FM only gets 6 free tickets a year. What's going on, guys?
But I've already banked the ones for Florence. So Florence is my
Fab.
first show that I have tickets for
you go.
2026. I'm excited.
Very nice.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your memories today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.